Shirley here with siriustalesmoon. This is Moon Hour and Mars Night. The moon, we just had a new moon, and the moon is slowly releasing from the square to Neptune. It's still squaring on the degree. Midheaven is ruled by Venus. Venus is 24 degrees Sag, just 2 degrees from the galactic center, so it's a very relational, both in the sense of Venus, union, and moon, relation, attachment, upbringing. Um, the square to Neptune is a crisis where, with Neptune, there is surrendering something. And Neptune works best erotically when it's relaxed arousal, and non erotically when it's being with the void and manifesting. However, the squares to Neptune, particularly with Mars here on 3 degrees Capricorn, this ruled by Saturn, and Venus is applying to square Saturn, there is a high intensity. Pluto is on the second degree, which is the degree of Venus, and accentuate the taboos around high intensity in relations, whether in energy or in a physical form. So, definitely readdressing deeper, intricate, almost etheric themes through crisis. Um, I was talking about the P in the LGBTQ and how people that grew up in an environment that were abused since the mother held the baby in the womb. And it was actually shown that um, maybe even by people that were affiliated with jurisdiction and child abuse as abusers. but there were also that begins with being abused. And this is where um, those extremely abusive environments as upbringing. I'm talking about the elite. I'm talking about, yes, we have a trine to Aries, which is retrograde 24 degrees Aries. I'm talking about the cloning project. I'm talking about MK Ultra, MK Often. I'm talking about the Peter Rings. I'm talking about the fact that Epstein raped 17 years old while the father of his niece was doing that to 3 years old. Okay, I'm talking about really, really challenging stuff. And in no society, power, how should I say that? During the Intifada, um, there was a time where Jihad, Hamas, and Fatah were competing over taking responsibility for. There was a time where they were not wanting to take responsibility, and there was a time when each and one of them says, I did it, I did it, I did it, because it was a power thing. That's the type of dynamics that people grow into. Their child self never gets to be. Anything that is feminine never gets to be, okay? Or alternatively, in some families, the man would be, or the male would be, um, supported by the mother for his um, not masculine traits because the masculinity expressed itself as power. And those things affect what we need for emotional growth. Okay? For example, I grew up in a household where my mother was the other way around. She would not tolerate me crying. I could never cry at home. If anybody would even think to harm, she'd say, you gotta beat them so hard that they don't even think doing that again. So I had to grow into developing places where vulnerability is safe, and that turned to if something doesn't honor my vulnerability, then I beat them so hard that they never even think to do that again. So, so I just think about, okay, I just think about the many things that are coming with the outer planets. Neptune dissolves our coping mechanisms. This is why Neptune is associated with addiction, because addiction is a coping mechanism to something that is missing and cannot be done without. When it comes to gender and gender expression, um, that has a lot to do with power. Because in those places where the misnomer or the misgendering, okay, shout out to Light, um, had to do with power abuse, there are feminization, humiliation rituals in the cult. I talked about address and address, um, and so experiencing the feminine is something that is not a part of humiliation. It's something that's completely new to most elite society, if not all. And and mind you, some of these people are genuinely gay, or even because they they do forced sex change, which is a part of abuse. Then people that were born female or cisgender never even got to experience their gender because everything was made out to be something from the right of the external. And that was the point, to not even grow an identity, to grow into mind control and so on and so forth. That affects all of society. And this is why I'm addressing that, because I see that in this new moon, whether it's Light, who is intuitive, like the Sefa from YouTube, or a psychologist and astrologer, um, okay, like Jewel with Truth in Aspect Astrology, um, I feel that without talking about the cloning project, without talking about, and now I have Aries going through my personal planets, and it's touching on some moons, and it's touching on my own Mercury, and it would be squaring the end of Cancer. So anybody with placement at the end of Cancer, the end of Capricorn, which is my lot of fortune. In fact, she's quite squaring my lot of fortune. The end of Libra. Yeah, those would be the hard aspects. The more harmonious would be the end of Gemini, um, the end of Aquarius, and the end of Sag, and the end of Leo. Okay, which is basically trying to mind midheaven, and this is where I have the contribution, the unique contribution in astrology um, that others don't quite have in that particular regard, because people don't really talk about the ritual abuse to do with what is putting LGBTQ flag as a mask. And that's something people don't even tend to. Well, they can absolutely be authentic. How should I say that? It can either be authentic gayness, or that the person was going through forced sex change, and that anything, let's say cisgender feminine, okay, going through forced sex change, or cisgender man going through forced sex change, and the feminization was a humiliation ritual, and so the encounter with the feminine was through humiliation and power, rather than through standing in one's power and honoring one's vulnerability. So what we have here is a shit ton of juxtapositions, um, where Neptune is removing the veil. And the coping mechanisms. This is why I see with people that don't tend to. And you know what? One great remedy for, if you have, let's just say that, if this is the first time you see anything to do with limerence, obsession, intrusive thoughts, karmic relationships, go watch Jewel. Okay, number one, number one astrologer regarding those things. She's both a psychologist and an astrologer. When I learned about synastry of outer planets to inner planets, um, before I became kind of an outer planets to inner planets, because Pluto and Neptune are very prominent in my chart, I binge watched the synastry series of Jewel, and that would be the first thing. But if you are the type of person that gets stuck in those, okay, if you are um, uh, 2 3 decades, let's say, okay, and it's not a Neptune transit in your seventh or something, if it's several decades that you try to, and all the psychology, all the astrology, all the intuitive readers are not seeming to, watch Anneke Lucas, watch Anya Weck, watch ritual abuse survivors. Okay? Uh, don't try to solve relational pattern when everything is genuinely and authentically stacked against you without tending to what is stacked against you. Because there's a shit ton of wealth consolidation on natural resources done by keeping people in trauma based relations and ritual abuse, by trafficking people, by keeping people in pedophilic settings. Okay? And all of these healings are something that's happening in spite of. And this is, and again, I'm talking to a very particular crowd. Okay, if it's the first time you ever see anything about, I don't know, a limerence, obsession, whatnot, go watch Jewel. If it's a power dynamic that could be somewhat occultistic, go watch Alaita Sefa. Um, but if it's something that's been ongoing, and all of these things are wonderful insights, none of them is suffice, that's the time to listen to ritual abuse survivors. Because without tending to that, and as an astrologer, I can attest, Aries is going through your something. Okay? Aries is opposing now Endecan of Libra, squaring Endecan of Cancer and Capricorn. And she could even be trining, or you have something like me in the Endecan of Aries. Okay? Even a Chiron. Some people have a Chiron there, and now Chiron is going with Aries. So, without tending to those things, none of the other things will. And I'm speaking from experience. This is why I'm watching Jewel uploading a set about twin flames, obsession, limerence, and whatnot, and I'm like, nothing that I'm tending to. Okay, and or watching Light, and it's like the power dynamics. And my first thought as an astrologer is like, oh yes, the Pluto hard aspect, but I'm like, no, I'm wiser. It's bad then the outer planets. It's ritual abuse. And this is what this new moon, this is why I make an episode about this new moon, because I'm the only astrologer I know that talks about those things. Okay? And and by the way, it triggers the community of survivors as well, because astrology within those circles was used to curse people and to create and perpetuate, okay, the role of a psychologist in those circles, or a psychiatrist, was the one that perpetuates trauma to keep them loyal back in the family. How do you solve a family feud within the elite? You basically bring people back into trauma, because then they get relation. And I thank Anya Wake so much for accentuating that. And there's this weird swan that insists on safe, sane, healthy relations. And it's not rule, it's essential to eroticism that works before, during, and after, and to non eroticism that needs to be honored. And it's not by denying, it's by authentically accepting. So, just like I don't know, we get people get out of obsessive or intrusive thoughts by tending to the topic of the outer planet. Who is this person? Is this person of a position of power? Amazing. What type of position of power? Oh, they seem to understand about occult. Amazing. That probably means you need to study occult, not just not okay. Or oh, they seem to be in a position of power of I don't know, understanding the finance behind war. Okay, fantastic. Learn about, learn about the finance behind war, and learn about the wealth consolidation that's done through extortion cults, because that's the nitty gritty. And it's not about a one up or a power card. It's about what do you need to tend to if a person has obsession, to alleviate the obsession. But it also, what do you need to tend to at this time that comes up dramatically. Sun squaring, Sun is about to square Neptune. Moon squaring Neptune. Um, it's a crisis around what was missing. Now, some coping mechanisms might come to the forefront. Okay, particularly I see the coping mechanism of, it's not a coping mechanism. It's basically the people that try to force their presence in a way that devoids a person to be themselves, and they cause the person to escape away to where it's not either rapey or obsessive. And that is kind of a continuum, even when we remove the erotic part of that. But then another thing comes up, which is the child self that comes to the forefront upon trauma. And those things serve to bring the child self. And in the past, it was used to create an extortion situation. And that is what's beginning to be resolved. Okay? Again, all of this thing happening in Jupiter's sign, Jupiter in the sign of 22 squaring Chiron 22, the extortion calls that are basically, whether it's child assassin, whether it's extortion, or invoking limerence in pedophilia situations. I'm trying to understand that as the child. I was the child in that dynamic, and I'm trying to understand it as the child. Um, but it's basically invoking the child in the adult, and also the adult is the child. And then for me, my child self is like, well, I do need, how should I say that? I do need a safe, sane relation. And there is this almost quantum phase of child and adult. But because I was, I guess, the child that would be um, sent to, okay, that then um, then basically the those that were supposed to be the adults would be pushed into their child self coming out, so that they feel comfortable with doing something that, and that would be used as extortion, as assassination. And it was some sort of such programming And my child self insisted on having safe, same relation, on having only eroticism that I consent to and willingly, which means that it is not, it's misplaced. In child self, it's misplaced arousal. Okay, I know it's very weird to people, um, but that's like you understand. That's not the type of stuff that people that just talk about limerence or intrusive thoughts are going to get you. Like if you're dealing with something like that, that's the time to listen to ritual abuse survivors because this is a huge um, reason for why somebody would not be able to be erotic with people and would not be going through, not be agreeing to go into misplaced arousal and needs to grow into relaxed arousal. It's both about meeting non-erotic self-child of the child needs. It's both about shifting the notion of power, and I think like the Sefer here because it's not the power of the Intifada that Fatah, Hamas, and Jihad are like, we did it, we did it, we did it, when that's a terrorist attack on people exploding. Okay? Because of that notion of power that came with those type of abuses. Okay, you rest assured that any terror group is a rape pedorim group. That's how they get them to explode, leaving people with themselves and think, And so, and what I see with this new moon is direct confrontation. Venus in Sagittarius, the freedom to be sensual. Okay, Saturn in Pisces, the crisis of the old clergy that doesn't understand the sacred because they could either have no sexuality or whore as a man or a woman is usually being a child. And even as the pedophile self, I guess from them is being connecting with the child self, um, a lot of people reverberate that intuition, whether it's Teal Swan and uh, Annika Lucas and so on, because they had no access to their child self. And their child self went through abuse, and then them being in their power is abusing. But because it's so unconscious as a child. This is why I disagree with Maloney that the antipsychotic pills are just going to solve that. No, castration is not the answer. Um, okay, I'm not against like controlling the how should I say that? Castration is not the answer to these things. Stopping anyone from raping a child is, and solving that problem with drugs. Like, how should I say that? The drugs were used to get people into those situations. Um, Chemical castration in the form of these drugs is something that is another violence on the life energy that doesn't actually get to the root of why that pedophilia is there. And that's the wealth consolidation, extortion, causal wealth resources. Okay, that's the rubber bank. That's the Rockefellers. That's the Rothschilds. That's the clergy, the Opus Dei. That's those things. And we can't curate the world from pedophilia without curating the world from this type of economy that creates pedophilia, or the type of religion that creates a courtesan cartesan division, also in the philosophy of the mind. Okay, and that is not a personal attack. Okay, I'm actually really appreciating people like Maloney that are very pragmatic and saying, hey, we need to tackle pedophilia. We can't legalize pedophilia. We need to actually come up with a solution. And I really um, appreciate that and the authenticity of tending to that, definitely within the Medici's. So I have nothing but sheer admiration um, to uh, to Maloney, and and at the same time, um, people won't be able to sort this dynamic out without addressing those things, and it's not a secret, because a secret is where the sacred was violated. This is also pertaining to occult communities where the gnosis or the rituals are secret, and that is. Um, and there is always the excuse of persecution, but under that lying um, basically booming pedophilia with various degrees of violence, and the inversion of the pleasure pain, which causes sadism and masochism. A book that I'm listening to at this time, it's a 10-hour book, is Jewel. That's her um, channel, Truth in Aspect Astrology. Fantastic to those that don't deal with extortion calls, but it's also fantastic as a complementary, okay, to that content. And one of the books that I'm reading that was a recommendation um, when I was listening to Annika Lucas, and she named Bryce Tyler. Okay, there's a lot of thanks for the memories, Bryce Tyler. Okay. Um, Hopefully, I can get the actual book, but this is the 10 hours and 44 minutes where she talks about anything MK Ultra, MK Often, the Monarch programming, and so on and so forth. A must read for people that deal with those topics and actually want to resolve them, because there is no therapist that's going to do that. Even in Israel, they begin to put a religious hotline for ritual abuse. Come on, nobody buys that. It's just another controlled opposition type of thing, but with ritual abuse, and because they try to create this division of there is the God, and even Bryce Tyler talks about the God that Satan, because that's the thing that they can speak about in the United States. But that same God, where was he when those things were happening? Okay, and and it's happening under the guise of religion as well. So again, I'm not anti-theist. It's just that we don't really have a divine connection when there is ritual abuse, and the courtesan partisan of either sex within marriage, which is also rape and trafficking, or whoredom, and and either way, the willing consent, the non-erotic need, either way, those things are not even being tended to in any of the religions. They would say whatever, but then the Talmud, but then the Opday, but then Muhammad that waits for 6 years old Aisha to turn 9. Okay, it's like denounce that, put that as teach this as people would teach Mein Kampf as a what not to do thingy and why not to do. Okay, because that enabled the wealth consolidation by the population enslavement and creating a divide and conquer. And if we want to actually have a good life on earth, That's not something that we can live with as society. Now, some people might live in cult-like perceptions and so on, but this video is basically it's prompted by the vicinity of those who are breaking the courtesan partisan division, shifting the notion of what power is essential for them, understanding that there is something missing, Neptune, and that missing is something they can't just do away with. They can't just do a detour around. One of the people who talks about meeting our needs is Teal Swan. And I know a lot of it's called, not called, wait, when Teal Swan was talking about her being survivor of ritual abuse by Mormon community in the 90s, and people swiped it under the rug as satanic panic, don't come complaining now. Talk about raise awareness to ritual abuse so people can get the chance to heal while they were paving the path for all of us to speak and changing the world of psychology and psychiatry while having to combat trafficking, which for a lot of people meant participating in trafficking, being a trafficker. Okay, I'm not saying Teal Swan, but a lot of these people were in those positions because there was no therapy. Even when Anneke Lucas talked about her coming out of these cults, she was told never have sex for anything, not for money, not for resources. And then she was told to marry a rich banker in her economic level, not more than her, or I don't know, a rich person I'm sorry, in her status. And she was considered part of the elite. So she married a rich banker, and she was told even New York bank, and she did that. And then she got time off that she didn't have to work, and this is why we are all receiving the fruits of that. Okay, and see how important it is to have housing and food independent of ability to work for extended period. Now, Annika Lucas had to marry a person to do that, and she was told never to have sex for money. Okay, so I'm not getting into the nitty gritties. I'm just talking about what she talks about. Um, but we can't depend that on marriage. Definitely not to bankers. Okay, is what I'm saying. Because banking, the banking upper elite is where the big ritual, it's not for nothing that those cults were run by the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers. In Netherlands, there's a lot about the Rabobank. And this is, at the end of the day, to heal people do need that time. And it changes everything we know about labor. Okay, so it's not just like if a person is homeless, you don't, oh, let me fix it with a job. They won't be able to work. Oh, how will people pay the debt? Slavery. They'll get typhus and die by the masses. So, and we all deserve to heal. We all deserve to, um, and not everybody can just marry a, marry a rich banker, which is absolutely not safe. I'm grateful that Anneke Lucas got the ability to study. Trudy Verstegen divorced a rapist husband that was a banker, and her children were kidnapped to rituals, very likely, and and she wasn't allowed to see them. And then she had no choice but to expose the cloning project. Okay, she was, okay, I don't know what was she doing in Pifidea before that, but she was waiting for people to help her when she divorced basically a rich banker from the Royal Bank. Um, and she exposes the rituals and the cloning and the DNA and the intense aggression um, that's happening there. And thus was deprived of access to banking. Okay, again, if there are more details about this story, these details can come out. Um, but you understand that what's coming up with this new moon, with Saturn Neptune, is highly unlikely um, just internal patterns. And to heal from the internal patterns that people have been talking about and given it even the name twin flames, which is beyond weird, but that is it's something that people have come accustomed that they have to use in the algorithm to get to the correct viewers. Um, because it's like in the algorithm, like, okay, who are the people who are dealing with the problems that I'm solving? Well, they're speaking in twin flame um, logistics, and so I have to apply to their terminology so that this information would get there. And that's the SEOing of our algorithms. Um, but right now, with the Saturn, Neptune, and this new moon, and the Mula Nakshatra aspect of that, it's those heavy things that we are dealing with. And this is where, Venus will be squaring Saturn tomorrow. Um, and this is the crisis of values. Anything that's rapey has the wrong paradigm, whether it's medicine, philosophy, psychology, astrology, uh, uh, politics, economy, anything, occult, religion. And because everything was based fundamentally on beyond extreme violence, then that's the core of everything that we know. Whether we are in the elite or outside of the elite, or just going through relationships issues, or trying to get a job and wonder why is no job yielding. And that intense, because there are energies in the field that are intensely trying to oppress themselves on another person, and they're coming from that clergy type of thinking. They don't have the sacred in their mind when it comes to eroticism and non-eroticism as well, because of these juxtapositions are like a power. They try to press people into trauma, basically, so that the child self will come out and have trauma to the child self, and then it's filmed, and then it's an extortion cult. It's affecting, those extortion cults are affecting people's freedoms. because the playing the Machiavellian, playing the power. If you play power plays, you don't have freedom. It's antithetical to freedom. Okay, now because in those societies everything was built into Machiavellian. That was the only thing that would sustain, and that was the only thing that would survive. And yet there are things that are missing that one cannot be without. And that can create obsessions, limerences. Um, I want to talk about the Saturn Pluto, okay? Because the Saturn Pluto hard aspects are the aspects where even the easy aspects are not really easy, but the aspects of Saturn and Pluto, um, they are aspects that require us to change a fundamental structure that is taboo to even conceptualize. Okay? The Bilderberg chart is now going through the square of Pluto to its Saturn. And and again, um, you can't say that sexuality is a taboo in Bilderberg. That being said, relaxed arousal is, because there was no relaxed arousal. There was relaxing into intense abuse, but not relaxed arousal. And in many ways, that's what we all crave, because I grew up with a parent with whom I have Pluto Saturn square, and then it accompanied me. I spent a decade befriending a person. We had a Pluto Saturn square. I wasn't even aware of that. Um, okay, it's a separating aspect, but it was definitely evident. In academia, definitely it came about. Um, then I tended to the Corvan out, and then people born in the late 80s that they have a Pluto conjoining my Saturn, and then I ran into the people that have the Pluto Saturn opposition in their chart, which was the late 60s, but also I think the late 90s, hit in 98, something like that. I would have it in a synastry. Those that have Saturn in Taurus, the end of Taurus, oh, the beginning of Taurus would be squaring my Pluto. So it's kind of like that's something that is beyond intense. Saturn rules something that is also what we must deal with. And what we must deal with is we must change. We must, to transcend that, we need to change those very, it's basically, Pluto is power, Saturn is debt, slavery, banking, bonds. Okay, if Mars Pluto is real estate, Saturn is all the way up to currency. Okay, and we understand, and I think this new moon is very apparent. We understand we can't do without vulnerability. We can't do without honoring the place in ourselves where we are also allowed to be vulnerable and have that honored and respected. Okay, I talked about the fact that I grew in a household where I was told it was intolerable. Me crying was intolerable. It brought so many accumulating issues, physical and mental. Um, and that's just me growing as a single daughter to a person that had to grow me as a single mom and wanted to protect her child. Okay, it's not, we're not talking Peter rings here. And then I had to basically fight for my ability to express the range of emotions, which necessitated was necessary for me to be happy. Because if I cannot be myself, how can I be happy? And then I didn't know what it's like to feel happiness. So these Saturn Pluto conditions, constraints, um, it's not for nothing that some of the people that have been most emotionally supportive of me were actually gay men that were grew up in an opposite, which is they were embraced expressing emotions that are vulnerable, and that's an obvious juxtaposition. Okay, that's just an obvious polarity. Um, it's because obviously they had a psychological trait that I needed to embody. One of the things that I saw, even in mundane politics, is um, the way people would sometimes avoid appreciating others, okay? Because that would be perceived as soft or weak in terms of power, but politics is also connection. And without authenticity and actually trust, there's only algorithms and extortion calls. So I remember when I was in university and I was the kind of, improving on my communication skill to, and I studied politics and governance. Um, and I remember that that was perceived by people that came basically within the intelligence, which is even more horrid because those are the people that are supposed to keep us safe. That's not exactly what they do. um, but basically, that went completely, you know, misconstrued. Although we see that the people that actually have a knack for relations, they see that it's not something with, it's something that if it's missing, it's not something that we can go without. And it's not just a power play or a power move. With Venus in Sagittarius, we want freedom. With Venus in Sagittarius in Mula Nakshatra, we want freedom amongst the elite. Okay? And it's not about elite. It's about, hey, there's that place there that decides on everything in the world. We are entitled, each and every one of us, regardless of origin, to be a part of the decision makers. It's choice there. It's not just choice for these people that are absolutely not more competent to make these choices. Actually, not really competent to make these choices. On a more spiritual level, it's understanding that, hey, the guru that could be raping children is not really more competent to make choices. Regarding the community, Chiron in Aries is so good. Applying to trying this point, or separating from trying to this point, is so good in reminding us that everybody has their sense of self issues, and we can't really depend on we can only depend on the people that came before us, learning and growing. Okay, if I would ask, let's say, even one of the people I really, listen to a lot. So if I would ask Annika Lucas, how did you come out? How did you? I married a rich banker. Uh, I can't marry people. I can't be intimate with people. I that bankers today are the people that rape children. Okay, this is she doesn't have anything to say to me because to be able to marry someone, I would need to heal, and to be able to heal, all she knew was to marry someone. Okay, and that worked for the people that came before me. It's not something that worked for the people in my generation, and we would have to invent the wheel. We would have to really tend to the fact that we need ritual abuse free real estate, free of ritual abuse, real estate, soil, land, no children buried alive here, halting all rituals transmuting, which means there are the survivors are no longer afflicted by what happened on this particular soil or land. Because we need housing first, independent of ability to work. We need to eat from what actually grows on the land, granted that it's not radioactive. Okay? And you know what? I even think about the A bombs where they fell. Think about Japan. Japan. It's not really the most not ritually abusive society. I know they're with NATO now. But sometimes it depletes the land so much so that people do need to exile. Israel, 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 Israel. and and when those ritual abuse things happen on the soil, things really stop growing and they stop being nourishing, or what's growing is not nourishing or literally radioactive, then people need to go on another soil and eat from that soil, but also they need to heal from the ritual abuse that took part on the soil. And on the soil, not just on the physical soil, but as wealth consolidation on the natural resources that are basically underneath that soil, which are listed as real estate, which is listed in banks and trust funds. What resources? Oil, rare earth minerals, gas. So there really was no reason to push people like Annika Lucas to say Rockefeller. Okay, Noble Energy, Esso, um, they're the Standard Oil. They're all what? They're all oil companies. Do you really think that the other ones work differently? And we can't really, you know, if this is the first time you run into the concept of, um, um, how should I say that, intrusive thoughts in relations and so on and so forth, yeah, go ahead, watch my colleagues. They're masters at that. Okay, they spend, that's their career. That's their career tended to the dumb fuckery of relationships. But if you're there stuck and it's more than 15, 20 years, and you've already listened to all that there is to listen, and the issue still persists, that's the time to talk about ritual abuse. Because that's affecting your relationships, that's affecting your career, that's affecting your attachment patterns, um, that's affecting what's in the bank. Um, the challenges, the elated or depressive emotion, mental health, whatnot. Okay, that's affecting those things. And when you understand that putting people in what people call karmic positions, which is trauma positions, was a way to maintain really deep relations and loyalty in the aristocracy. Now you understand what your relational problems are. And it's usually what aristocracy. I'm a BIPOC person in the United States. Fantastic. Your BIPOC aristocracy. The color of the skin does not make the change here. It's the patterns. And they are cross. They're all the colors of the rainbow, you know? It's What do you think MK Ultra and MK Often was? What is MK Often? They were given occultists money to train them to target individuals. Okay, amazing. What occultists? Also BIPOC. The people that you occult knew. Oak Western occultists, I mean the Nazis and this. What is that inspired by? The indigenous traditions that were there. Who sacrificed virgins? The Vikings and the Babylonians. Who sacrificed children? The Mayans did it. The Aztecs did it. They all got extinct. But the Mayans did it, and the Aztecs did. That's pretty much how the people that decide about the resources distribution, and that is Ba'aden countries, Ba'aden flags, Ba'aden borders, Ba'aden cultures, Ba'aden religions. Now, of course, there are also people from those communities that run into social media, people, I don't know, okay, whatever juxtapositions, that find that quite interesting how, or seek to embody that, or hate the fact that is missing. And and it's usually going to be in the sense that they have something that the people recovering from outside don't, and vice versa. Okay, so and so this is where, um,